for hundreds of years. Her name has brought shivers of fear. Her image is a scary picture of great power. A monster's head with snakes for hair, eyes that turn people to stone, a face of pure, horrifying dread. This is Medusa. She's the Gorgon, the ultimate symbol of ancient, unstoppable fear. But behind those eyes that freeze you, and the deadly snakes, there's a much deeper story. It's a sad tale born from gods being jealous, a girl's beauty, and a wrong so deep it broke a spirit and changed a legend forever. Forget the monster you think you know. Forget the easy bad guy. Because before the scales, before the sharp teeth, before the snake hair, there was Medusa the woman. She was a maiden of amazing beauty, a loyal follower of the strongest goddess, and a pure, innocent person caught in the harsh ways of the gods. How did something so beautiful become so terrifying? What terrible act could turn a shining priestess into a symbol of fear? The answers aren't found in darkness, but in the bright light of wanting power, envy, and the cruel changes of the gods. Get ready to look past the stone and into the true, heartbreaking story of Medusa. Long before people feared her gaze, Medusa was known for her grace and beauty in the sunny city of Athens. She wasn't born a monster, and she wasn't born a goddess. She was a human, amazingly beautiful, with a brightness that seemed to catch the light in her eyes. Her skin was said to be like smooth, shiny ivory, her lips as pink as the morning sky, and her body moved with a natural grace that made everyone look. But it was her hair, long and dark, that was her most stunning feature. It flowed like soft, black silk, shining with an almost magical glow, a truly perfect gift from nature. This hair, it was said, rivaled even the golden tresses of the goddess Athena herself, though Medusa, in her humility, would never have dared to think such a thing. She considered her beauty merely a gift, not a source of pride or rivalry. But Medusa was more than just pretty. Her spirit, too, was special. She was naturally pure, quiet in her faith, and deeply respectful of the gods. From an early age, her heart was drawn to the grand power of the gods, especially to Pallas Athena. Athena was the wise, fierce, and always pure goddess of wisdom, war, and crafts. Medusa chose to give her life to serving Athena, embracing the demanding vows of a priestess. This wasn't a small choice. It was a serious act of giving herself to her faith. She entered the temple young, dedicating her entire future to the strict rules of chastity and devotion that Athena required of her handmaidens. Within the sacred, hallowed walls of Athena's grand temple, a sanctuary dedicated to purity, enlightenment, and the pursuit of knowledge, Medusa found her true purpose, a sense of belonging and peace she cherished more than any earthly praise. Life in the temple was one of quiet devotion and meticulous ritual. Medusa's days began before dawn, with the first light filtering through the high windows, illuminating the intricate carvings and cool marble floors. She would assist the older priestesses in preparing the temple for the day's prayers, lighting fresh incense that filled the air with sweet, woody scents, and polishing the bronze offerings until they gleamed. Her voice, a soft, melodic hum, often led the morning chants, a sound that brought comfort and a sense of divine presence to all who heard it. She spent hours studying ancient texts, learning the sacred lore, and meditating on Athena's teachings of strategy, justice, and the importance of self-control. There was a gentle rhythm to her life, a profound sense of meaning found in every careful step and whispered prayer. She believed that her unwavering dedication would earn her the goddess's favor and protection. As a priestess, Medusa was a shining example of faith. Her movements were graceful as she tended to the sacred flames, ensuring they never faltered, a constant symbol of Athena's watchful presence. She showed all the good qualities that Athena herself prized: discipline, strong effort, and an unwavering commitment to purity, especially the sacred vow of virginity. Her beauty, far from being a distraction, seemed to amplify her devotion, making her a living testament to the goddess's divine power and the sacredness of her domain. She was unspoiled, innocent, and utterly committed to her chosen path. There was no trace of malice or guile in her heart, only a quiet strength born of faith and a deep respect for the divine laws she upheld. She reveled in the tranquility of the temple, a place of refuge and purpose, believing herself safe within its consecrated boundaries, protected by the very deity she served with such unwavering loyalty. She envisioned a life dedicated to spiritual growth, free from the turbulent passions of the outside world, a life of serene service under the benevolent gaze of her divine patron. This was her sanctuary, her destiny, and the sum of her aspirations. But even the holiest places and the purest hearts can't escape the wild moods of the gods, especially when desire, jealousy, and uncontrolled power come crashing down upon them. Her unmatched beauty, which was once a gift, would soon become a terrible curse. It would attract the unwanted attention of a powerful god, setting off a chain of events that would change her from a respected maiden into a terrifying symbol of a god's anger and deep, undeserved pain. The peace she knew was fragile, a delicate veil about to be torn apart by a storm of epic proportions, a storm born not of nature, but of divine transgression. The sacred calm of Athena's temple, a place meant to keep its priestesses safe from the wild feelings of the human and god worlds, was about to be horribly broken. Medusa, in her strong faith, kept doing her duties, not knowing that her stunning beauty, once a sign of creation, had caught the eye of someone whose desires were as vast as the ocean itself. Poseidon, the mighty god of the seas, earthquakes, and horses. His power was huge, his temper quick, and his desires were rarely turned down. He was known for his many relationships, often taking what he wanted without thinking about the results, leaving chaos in his wake. Poseidon had seen Medusa. Perhaps he caught a glimpse of her during a rare moment outside the temple, her dark hair shining under the Grecian sun as she offered prayers at a coastal shrine. Or perhaps his divine sight pierced the temple walls, drawn by her pure, unblemished beauty that even the gods found breathtaking and uniquely alluring. For a long time, he watched her from a distance, his interest growing into a powerful, consuming hunger. The fact that she was a priestess of Athena, sworn to chastity and protected by a rival goddess, only seemed to fuel his determination. This wasn't merely desire. It was a desire laced with a challenge, a subtle taunt towards Athena. He saw her as a prize to be conquered, a challenge to be won, a testament to his own limitless power, rather than a living, feeling person with her own agency and sacred vows. The very act of entering Athena's temple for such a purpose was a deliberate insult to the goddess, a bold statement of his own disregard for her laws and her sacred domain. One fateful day, driven by this relentless desire and a complete lack of regard for the sacred, Poseidon entered Athena's temple. The air in the sanctuary, usually still and filled with the scent of lilies and beeswax, suddenly crackled with an unseen, unnatural tension, almost a suffocating pressure. This was not a visit of worship or respect. It was an invasion, a forceful breaking of holy rules, a profound sacrilege against everything the temple stood for. In the very heart of the sacred place, within the hallowed grounds meant for purity and untouched by anything impure, Poseidon confronted Medusa. She was alone, perhaps deep in prayer, her eyes closed in peaceful meditation, her spirit reaching out to her goddess. Or perhaps she was tending to the temple's sacred flame, her back to the world, her mind focused only on her duties. She was innocent, utterly unprotected, and completely unprepared for the raw, overwhelming force of a god's unwanted attention, a presence that filled the hallowed space with a dark, primal energy. What followed was a horrific act, a violation that went against all holy rules and human understanding of right and wrong, twisting the very fabric of divine and mortal order. Poseidon, the mighty ruler of the seas, assaulted Medusa inside the holy walls of Athena's temple. Her cries were stifled, barely a sound against the heavy silence of the sanctuary, swallowed by the sudden thunder of Poseidon's presence and the terrifying rush of the ocean's raw power. Her desperate pleas were unheard by any but the cold stone and the silent, watchful statues of the gods, their faces unmoving, their power seemingly absent in her moment of greatest need. The pure maiden, who had given her life to good behavior and respect, was brutally harmed in the very place she felt safest, her spiritual home. Her sanctuary turned into a scene of defilement. Her innocence, her faith, and her body were all cruelly taken from her in an instant. The act was quick, devastating, leaving behind a whirlwind of dust, silence, and Medusa's shattered world. In the wake of Poseidon's brutal departure, a profound stillness filled the temple, but for Medusa, it was the crushing weight of utter desolation. Every part of her being screamed in silent horror, her mind reeling from the betrayal of the sacred space, the invasion of her body, and the crushing realization that her unwavering devotion had tragically not protected her. The sanctuary that was her life, her safe haven, had become her personal nightmare, a place of profound violation rather than solace. A deep, cold dread settled over her, a feeling of irreversible contamination that would forever stain her perception of herself and the world. She felt utterly alone, abandoned by the very deities she had so faithfully served. The act itself was a monstrous breach, not just of Medusa's personal freedom and purity, but also of the holiness of Athena's temple. It was a direct, unforgivable insult to the goddess herself, a brazen challenge to her domain and her strict rules of virginity, honor, and sacred trust. Medusa, the victim, was left broken, shamed, and deeply hurt by an experience that would forever scar her soul. The calm peace of her life was shattered beyond repair, replaced by a deep feeling of sadness and impurity, mixed with a dawning, bitter rage that simmered beneath her profound despair. She was defiled not by choice, but by brute force, and the shame, though not hers to bear, settled upon her like a heavy shroud, isolating her even from her own self, making her feel alien in her own skin. News of the terrible event, this deep insult to Athena's temple and her honor, quickly reached Olympus, the home of the gods. The Olympian Council, a gathering of the most powerful and often capricious deities, would have buzzed with the scandal. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war strategies, was consumed by a burning rage. Her fury was intense, fueled by a potent blend of personal insult, outrage over her sacred space being defiled, and a need to assert her authority within the often competitive hierarchy of the gods. Yet, in a cruel twist of divine justice, her anger was not directed solely at Poseidon, the true offender. Poseidon, as a powerful male god, was often seen as above reproach, his actions simply godlike behavior, even when destructive. The rules of Olympus, often arbitrary and self-serving, rarely held the most powerful gods fully accountable for their transgressions, especially when those transgressions were against mortals. Instead, Athena's anger, born from a mixture of offended pride, violated sacred space, and a chillingly pragmatic, even cruel, twist of divine logic fell upon Medusa. Why Medusa? This has been a question debated for ages, a point of deep moral discomfort and outrage in the myth. Some ancient stories suggest Athena saw Medusa's beauty as the root of the problem, the allure that drew Poseidon's unwanted attention, as if the victim's very existence was to blame for the crime. This perspective, though harsh, highlights the unforgiving nature of divine judgment where cause and effect are sometimes twisted to suit the god's own pride and convenience. Other interpretations argue that Athena, a goddess who valued her own virginity and the purity of her domain above all else, could not tolerate the defilement of her sacred space. To her, Medusa's presence in the temple after such an act, even as an unwilling victim, somehow tainted the sanctity of the place. The honor of the temple, and Athena's own good name and reputation among the Olympians, seemed to matter more than the suffering of her loyal priestess. It was a cold, hard judgment, devoid of empathy, focused purely on divine order, retribution, and the preservation of her own untarnished image. In many ways, Medusa became a scapegoat, the visible punishment that served as a stark warning to all, while the true aggressor, Poseidon, went largely unpunished by the Olympian Council, his power unchallenged. This highlights the inherent unfairness of the Greek pantheon's justice, where power often trumped morality. And so, Athena gave her terrible judgment, a curse that transformed Medusa utterly. It was not a punishment meant to fix things, to heal Medusa, or bring justice to Poseidon. Instead, it was designed to isolate, to transform, and to serve as a chilling, living warning. The curse began with Medusa's most admired feature, her hair. Once a cascade of rich, dark locks, so famously beautiful that it was spoken of throughout Athens and beyond, it began to twist, to writhe, to thicken and harden. Each strand transformed into a living, slithering snake, their scales glistening, their tiny forked tongues flicking, their venom dripping onto her shoulders. The feeling for Medusa was one of unimaginable horror, a crawling, sickening sensation as her scalp became a nest of vipers, each one a chilling, living reminder of the purity she had lost and the monstrousness she had become. Her radiant skin began to tighten and crack, hardening into rough, reptilian scales that covered her entire body, making her feel alien in her own flesh, every touch a reminder of her changed state. Her graceful body twisted and contorted, becoming grotesque and inhuman, her limbs stiff and her movements no longer fluid, her form now repulsive, and her beautiful eyes, which had once held such purity and devotion, became capable of the most horrifying power. Anyone who looked directly into them would instantly turn to cold, lifeless stone. The transformation was agonizing, a living nightmare that stole not just her beauty, but her very humanity, replacing it with a terrifying, alien form. She was no longer Medusa, the priestess, but a creature of dread, a walking curse, a monument to divine cruelty. This was a curse of unbelievable cruelty. Medusa was changed from a maiden of breathtaking beauty into a hideous monster, exiled from human society and condemned to a lonely existence. The very feature that had attracted Poseidon's attention, her hair, was made into a symbol of her monstrousness, a cruel irony that amplified her suffering. Her ability to see and be seen, to connect with others, was turned into a deadly weapon, severing her from any form of human connection and dooming her to a life of forced solitude. She was no longer just changed physically. Her identity was stripped away, her purpose destroyed, and her very essence redefined by trauma and divine wrath. She became a living prison, a cursed creature, fated to turn away or destroy anyone who dared to come near her. She became a walking monument to the gods' wrath and a warning to mortals about the dangers of divine envy and arbitrary punishment, a tragic figure caught in a cosmic power struggle. Her future was now one of being alone, full of fear, and a bitter life until her certain, unavoidable end. This brutal change was a chilling warning to anyone who might disrespect the gods or their holy places. But it was also a deep injustice. Medusa, the victim, was punished for a crime done to her, while Poseidon, the one who caused it, faced no such direct, physical punishment. She, who had known only faith and innocence, was made to carry the burden of a god's wrongdoing and another god's cold, harsh judgment. From that moment on, Medusa was no longer a priestess. She was the Gorgon, a creature of fear, sent away to the empty edges of the world, a sad monument to gods who didn't care and the heavy weight of a curse she never deserved. Her future was now one of being alone, full of fear, and a bitter life until her certain, unavoidable end. After Athena's cruel curse, Medusa was torn from everything she knew. The vibrant city of Athens, the sacred temple, the gentle touch of sunlight on her once soft hair. All were replaced by a bleak, desolate existence. She was banished to the far-off, rocky islands at the edge of the world, often described as the land of the Hyperboreans or a distant, windswept coastline. It was a place of shadows and jagged stone, a fitting prison for a creature now deemed a terror. Her transformation was not just external. It was a soul-deep wound that would never heal. The vibrant, pure-hearted priestess was gone, replaced by a being filled with a profound sorrow and an ever-present, simmering rage. Every glimpse of her reflection in a still pool of water, every slithering movement of the snakes that now crowned her head, was a painful reminder of what she had lost. Her eyes, once soft and inviting, were now instruments of death, turning any living thing that met their gaze into cold, lifeless stone. This power, while terrifying to others, was a source of endless agony for Medusa. It meant perpetual loneliness. She could never again look upon another living face, never truly connect with another soul, for fear of turning them to dust. Her world became a blurry, peripheral dance of shadows and shapes, as she constantly averted her gaze, trying to preserve what little life she could witness without destroying it. The constant internal battle to control her gaze, to prevent accidental petrification, was a new, exhausting burden, a daily struggle against her very nature. The change was total. Her once smooth skin became a rough, scaly hide, like that of a reptile, sensitive to every shift in the air. Constant irritation. Her hands, once delicate and graceful in their priestly duties, were now tipped with sharp, bronze claws, alien and grotesque, and the magnificent dark hair, her greatest beauty, writhed and hissed with a life of its own, each strand an independent, venomous serpent. The sounds were maddening. The constant rustle of scales, the dry, rasping whispers of snake tongues, the feeling of their cold bodies against her scalp. The scent of ozone and fear seemed to cling to her, an invisible shroud that kept all living things at bay. She was a living paradox, both a victim longing for release and a weapon designed to inflict ultimate stillness. She often felt like a statue herself, trapped within this monstrous form, a prisoner of her own power. Yet, Medusa was not entirely alone, though her companionship was a twisted comfort. She had two sisters, Stheno and Euryale. Unlike Medusa, her sisters were immortal, born as Gorgons from ancient, monstrous parentage, the primordial sea deities Perseus and Ceto. They were inherently monstrous, a natural part of the world's ancient, untamed forces, with scaly skin, bronze claws, and snake hair. They shared Medusa's hideous appearance, but not her tragic past. They were fierce, powerful beings, immune to the curse that had befallen their mortal sister. While their presence offered some form of companionship, it also highlighted Medusa's unique suffering. They were born to this monstrous state. She was thrust into it, a painful contrast between natural form and forced transformation. Some myths suggest they were her loyal protectors, fiercely guarding her from intruders and sharing in her bitter exile, their roars and clashing claws defending her from any who dared approach. Others paint them as more stoic, accepting of their monstrous nature, and perhaps less burdened by the grief that consumed Medusa, having never known the world as a beautiful mortal. Medusa herself felt a bitter connection to them. They were kin, bound by blood and shared monstrosity, yet their monstrousness was their birthright, while hers was a brutal violation. Their shared exile was a bond forged in fear, but the deep, personal wound of her curse, the memory of her stolen innocence, was hers alone to bear. There was a chasm of experience between them that even shared monstrousness could not bridge. Life on the desolate island was a constant, agonizing loop of fear, despair, and an overwhelming sense of loss. Medusa walked among the stone statues of those unlucky enough to stumble upon her lair, sailors shipwrecked, curious travelers, or unwitting beasts. These were not trophies, but gruesome monuments to her curse, silent witnesses to her isolation. Each petrified figure represented another life, unintentionally ended, another connection irrevocably severed. She lived with the haunting knowledge that her very existence was a threat, a danger to everything she might ever desire to approach. The whispers of the wind carried echoes of the pure life she once led, contrasting sharply with the cold reality of her cursed existence. She longed for an end, for release from the agonizing prison of her own monstrous form, a yearning for oblivion that became a constant undertone to her existence. Every sunrise was a fresh reminder of her living hell. The sun's rays, once a source of warmth in Athens, now merely highlighted the stark, silent figures of her victims, their stony eyes fixed on her in perpetual horror. She often wondered, in her isolated mind, what it felt like to be turned to stone. Was it sudden terror, a flash of pain, or a slow, creeping chill that consumed the body and mind? Did they feel their life draining away? Or was it an instant, merciful void, a sudden, cold sleep? These dark thoughts were her only companions, alongside the chilling rustling of her snake hair and the desolate cries of seabirds echoing across the barren rocks. Her days were a monotonous cycle of hiding from the world, of managing the immense power of her gaze, and of grappling with the profound unfairness of her fate. She was a weapon forged by the gods' wrath, and cast aside into a world where her only purpose seemed to be to instill terror and claim new victims. Her heart, once full of devotion and purity, was now heavy with the weight of her curse, a burden that no living creature should have to bear, a constant ache of what was and what could have been. The story of Medusa's suffering is a tragic one, an extreme example of how divine power could be used not for justice, but for bitter, undeserved punishment. She became a symbol of untamed horror, a creature to be hunted, even though her true terror lay not in her monstrous form, but in the profound pain and loneliness that defined her existence. Her story, though twisted, still carries a chilling warning about the consequences of unchecked power, both divine and mortal, and the enduring scars of victimhood that can turn beauty into beast. While Medusa endured her miserable exile far across the sea, another tale was unfolding that would eventually lead to their fateful clash. This was the story of Perseus, a young hero whose life was already marked by prophecy and divine intervention. Perseus was the son of Zeus, the king of the gods, and a mortal woman named Danae. His birth was surrounded by strange events, as an oracle had warned Danae's father, King Acrisius, that his own grandson would someday cause his death. Fearing this prophecy, Acrisius had cruelly locked Danae and her infant son Perseus in a wooden chest and cast them into the sea, hoping to avoid his fate. But fate, guided by the gods, would not be so easily avoided. The chest drifted safely to the island of Seriphos, where it was discovered by a kind fisherman named Dictys. Dictys took them in and raised Perseus as his own son, giving him a safe and loving home. Perseus grew into a strong, brave young man, known for his good nature and heroic spirit. He was unaware of his true, divine parentage, or the grand destiny that awaited him. However, Dictys had a brother, King Polydectes, who was the ruler of Seriphos. Unlike his kind brother, Polydectes was a greedy and power-hungry king. He desired Danae for himself, but she constantly refused his advances. He saw Perseus as an obstacle to his plans, a protective son who stood in his way. Polydectes, unable to force Danae to marry him while Perseus was around, began to plot. He decided to get rid of Perseus by trickery. Polydectes announced that he intended to marry another woman, Hippodamia, and called all the noblemen of the island to a grand feast, asking them each to bring a gift of horses for the marriage. Perseus, being poor and having no horses, felt ashamed. He boldly declared that he would bring the king any gift he wished, no matter how dangerous or difficult to obtain. This was the opening Polydectes had been waiting for. With a sly smile, Polydectes looked at Perseus and said, "Then bring me the head of Medusa, the Gorgon." The request was meant as a death sentence. Everyone knew the legends of Medusa, the monster whose gaze turned men to stone. No one had ever returned from her island. Polydectes believed Perseus would surely perish on such an impossible quest, leaving Danae unprotected and free for him to take. Perseus, driven by youthful pride, his heroic spirit, and perhaps a deep, unspoken need to prove himself, accepted the deadly challenge without hesitation. He did not fully grasp the sheer terror and impossibility of the task. He knew only that he had made a promise to a king, and a hero must always keep his word, no matter the cost. He set out on this journey alone, heading into the unknown, unaware that his path would intersect with the lonely, sorrowful existence of the cursed Gorgon. The stage was now set for a confrontation that would ripple through Greek mythology forever. His daring quest was not for glory alone, but was a desperate attempt to protect his mother, even if it meant facing a horror beyond human imagination. Perseus set off from Seriphos, feeling both determined and very unsure. He had promised to bring back the head of Medusa, a task that seemed impossible for any mortal. But as he journeyed, he found that the gods, though sometimes cruel, could also be helpful to those they favored. Two powerful Olympians, Hermes and Athena, stepped forward to guide and equip him. Hermes, the swift messenger of the gods, appeared to Perseus first. He was a cunning god, known for his speed and cleverness. Hermes lent Perseus his winged sandals, truly magical footwear that allowed the wearer to fly through the air with incredible speed and lightness, like a bird. He also gave Perseus a special, curved sword, a scimitar, made of hardened steel that was strong enough to cut through anything, even a Gorgon's tough scales. Hermes warned Perseus about Medusa's terrible gaze and told him he would need more than just a sword. Soon after, Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategic war, who had herself cursed Medusa, also offered her aid. While her justice against Medusa had been harsh, Athena still valued skilled heroes and order. She gave Perseus a highly polished bronze shield. This was no ordinary shield. Its surface was so bright and smooth that it worked like a perfect mirror. Athena explained that this shield would be Perseus's most important tool. He must never look directly at Medusa, but instead use the reflection in the shield to guide his attack. This way, he could see her without being turned to stone. But even with these powerful gifts, Perseus still needed to know Medusa's exact location, as her island was hidden from mortals. For this, Hermes told him he must seek out the Gree, also known as the Grey Ones or Old Ones. These were three ancient sisters, born old, who shared a single eye and a single tooth among them. They passed these parts around, using them one at a time. The Gree lived in a gloomy, dark place, far from human lands, and they guarded the knowledge of Medusa's lair. Perseus flew on his winged sandals, guided by the gods, until he reached the desolate, mist-shrouded land of the Gree. It was a place of despair and ancient dust. He found the three sisters huddled together, passing their single eye from one to the other, muttering prophecies and secrets in their creaking voices. As one sister was passing the eye to another, Perseus, swift and cunning like Hermes, quickly snatched it away. "Give me back my eye," the Gree shrieked, blinded and helpless. Perseus held the eye firmly. "I will return it," he said, his voice firm, "but only if you tell me the way to the Gorgon's island and to the nymphs who possess the helm of darkness." The nymphs, he knew, also guarded another vital tool, Hades' helm, which made the wearer invisible. Cornered and desperate, the Gree had no choice. They revealed the winding path to the Gorgon's island and explained how to find the nymphs of the Stygian marsh, who held the helm of darkness and other magical items. Once they had given him all the information, Perseus, true to his word, returned their eye. Equipped with divine gifts and crucial knowledge, Perseus continued his journey, feeling more confident but also understanding the immense danger ahead. He now possessed the tools to overcome Medusa's petrifying gaze and to approach her unseen. Meanwhile, on her rocky, lonely island, Medusa remained unaware of the hero swiftly approaching her. A hero armed not just with courage, but with the very cunning and wisdom of the gods who had condemned her to this miserable fate. Her long, painful existence was drawing to its inevitable, tragic close. The stage was set for the final confrontation, a clash between a hero's destiny and a monster's sorrow. With the winged sandals on his feet and the helm of darkness upon his head, Perseus became a ghost in the sky, unseen and unheard. He flew tirelessly, following the directions given by the Gree, until the barren, rocky shores of the Gorgon's island came into view. From above, it looked like a graveyard, strewn with the silent, stone figures of those who had dared to approach Medusa. There were petrified animals, brave warriors frozen mid-stride, and even unlucky sailors, their faces forever locked in terror or surprise. It was a chilling warning, a testament to the deadly power that resided there. Perseus landed silently, using the helm of darkness to stay completely invisible. He moved carefully through the desolate landscape, his bronze shield held high. He kept his eyes fixed on its shining surface, using it as a mirror to scan his surroundings. He could not risk even a direct glance at any of the Gorgons. The air on the island felt heavy, filled with a sense of ancient grief and a strange, hissing sound that told him the snakes were near. He soon found the Gorgons. They were asleep, sprawled among the rocks, their monstrous forms a terrifying sight even in reflection. Steno and Euryale, with their bronze claws and scaly bodies, slept soundly. But Medusa, even in sleep, carried a deeper sorrow. Her snake hair twitched subtly, each serpent a living part of her torment. It was said that while her sisters were immortal, Medusa was not. This meant she could be killed, and her death would finally bring her release. As Perseus approached, guided only by the distorted image in his shield, a wave of complicated feelings washed over him. He was there to fulfill a quest, to protect his mother from a cruel king. But as he looked at the sleeping Gorgon, he couldn't help but feel a pang of something akin to pity. This creature, a monster to the world, was also a victim of divine cruelty, exiled and cursed for an injustice she didn't commit. The snakes on her head seemed to writhe with a silent, endless pain. Her face, even twisted by Athena's curse, still held hints of the beauty it once possessed, now overshadowed by scales and fangs. This was not merely a monster, a shattered soul. With a deep breath, Perseus moved closer, his winged sandals making no sound. He lifted the curved scimitar, its sharp edge gleaming. He focused on Medusa's reflection in the shield, careful not to look directly at her. Athena's voice, or perhaps a feeling of divine instruction, seemed to guide his hand, telling him exactly where to strike. It was a precise, swift motion, an act of both bravery and calculated strategy. The blade descended, cutting through bone and flesh, severing the monstrous head from Medusa's body. In that moment, a strange thing happened. From the blood that flowed from Medusa's neck, two beings suddenly sprang forth. First, the winged horse Pegasus, a creature of pure white, with powerful wings that beat against the air. Second, a giant warrior fully armored and holding a golden sword, named Chrysaor. These were the children of Medusa and Poseidon, born from the very act of her violation, now released by her death. Their sudden appearance was a startling sight, a violent birth from a violent end. Medusa's immortal sisters, Steno and Euryale, awoke with a deafening shriek of rage and sorrow. They saw their sister, their only mortal kin, slain. They lunged at the unseen attacker, their bronze claws tearing at the air where Perseus had been, but he was protected by Hades' helm of darkness. Invisible and now armed with Medusa's head, Perseus quickly took flight with his winged sandals, escaping the vengeful fury of the remaining Gorgons. He left behind a scene of chaos and despair as the immortal sisters mourned their fallen, cursed sibling. For Medusa, the long, bitter nightmare was finally over. Her suffering had reached its tragic conclusion, not with a bang, but with the quiet, swift precision of a hero's blade. With Medusa's severed head safely tucked into a special bag given to him by the nymphs, Perseus turned his back on the desolate island of the Gorgons. His journey back was just as eventful, if not more, than his journey there. The head of Medusa, though separated from her body, still held its horrifying power to turn living things to stone. It was a weapon of immense, terrible force, and Perseus understood its danger as much as its usefulness. He knew he had to be extremely careful with it, keeping it hidden in the bag, only revealing it when absolutely necessary. His first stop on the way back took him to the land of the Hesperides, where he encountered the Titan Atlas, who held the weight of the heavens upon his shoulders. Atlas, weary from his endless burden, recognized Perseus as a hero and asked for assistance. Perhaps he was seeking a moment of respite, or perhaps he wished for an end to his eternal toil. Perseus, seeing the Titan's immense suffering, chose to use Medusa's head as a means to grant Atlas a final, everlasting peace. He presented the Gorgon's head, and with one swift look, Atlas was transformed into a colossal mountain range, his weary form becoming the enduring pillars that forever held the sky, a permanent monument to his torment and the Gorgon's final act of involuntary petrification. This was the first demonstration of the severed head's terrifying, yet strangely powerful impact. From there, Perseus continued his flight over the vast seas. It was during this part of his journey that he stumbled upon another scene of distress. Below him, chained to a jagged rock by the sea, was a beautiful maiden. This was Andromeda, the daughter of King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia of Ethiopia. Her mother, Cassiopeia, had boasted that her own beauty surpassed that of the Nereids, the sea nymphs. This boast had angered Poseidon, who, in his characteristic fury, sent a terrible sea monster, Cetus, to devastate the coast of Ethiopia. An oracle had declared that the only way to appease the sea god and save their land was to sacrifice Andromeda to Cetus. Perseus, ever the hero, was struck by Andromeda's plight and her incredible beauty. He instantly fell in love. He flew down and made a deal with King Cepheus and Queen Cassiopeia. If he could defeat Cetus and save Andromeda, he would be allowed to marry her. Desperate, the king and queen readily agreed. As Cetus rose from the waves, a monstrous beast with gaping jaws, Perseus soared into the sky. He used his winged sandals to fly around the monster, dodging its attacks. Then he brought out Medusa's head. With a flash of its stony gaze, Cetus was turned into a massive, lifeless rock, forever guarding the coastline, a chilling reminder of the Gorgon's power and the hero's daring. After saving Andromeda, Perseus married her in a grand ceremony. However, during the feast, Andromeda's uncle, Phineus, who had been promised Andromeda's hand in marriage, burst in with an army, trying to reclaim her by force. A fierce battle broke out. When Perseus realized he was outnumbered, he once again unveiled the Gorgon's head. As his enemies stared, their faces twisted in shock and horror. They were instantly turned into a silent army of stone statues, frozen forever in their aggressive poses. Medusa's power, even in death, served as a grim tool of justice and protection for her slayer. Having fulfilled his promise to Polydectes and found a bride, Perseus decided it was time to return to Seriphos. He knew the king's intentions were not good, and he was ready to face him. He flew back with Andromeda by his side, carrying the terrifying, yet victorious, head of Medusa. The final act of his quest, and the last, brutal use of Medusa's curse, was yet to come. Her presence, even as a severed head, continued to shape the destinies of mortals and gods alike. Perseus and Andromeda finally arrived back on the island of Seriphos, the place where Perseus had grown up and where his mother, Danae, was still in danger. He found the situation on the island far worse than he had left it. King Polydectes, believing Perseus to be long dead, had grown bolder and more aggressive in his attempts to force Danae to marry him. She had sought refuge at the altar of Athena, pleading for protection, but Polydectes showed no respect for the sacred space or for Danae's pleas. He was tyrannical, and his rule had become unbearable for the people of Seriphos. Dictys, Perseus's kind foster father, had also been forced to hide from the king's cruelty. Perseus entered Polydectes' palace, a place now filled with the king's arrogant followers and sycophants who openly mocked him, believing he had returned empty-handed and disgraced. When Perseus announced his return and presented himself, Polydectes sneered. "So, the boy has returned, but where is the Gorgon's head you promised?" he taunted, refusing to believe Perseus had succeeded. He accused Perseus of lying and even threatened to punish him and Danae. This was the moment. Perseus had completed his dangerous quest, fought monsters, saved a princess, and now stood before the man who had tricked him into this deadly journey. He looked at Polydectes, a man consumed by greed and cruelty, and knew that his reign of terror had to end. The tension in the room was thick, as the king's men drew their swords, ready to seize Perseus. "You demand the head," Perseus declared, his voice ringing through the hall, echoing with both power and a sense of finality. "Then prepare to receive it." With a swift, decisive motion, Perseus pulled Medusa's head from the bag. He did not look at it himself, keeping his eyes averted or using his shield as a mirror, but he held it high for all to see. The power of the Gorgon's curse, even in death, was absolute. The moment King Polydectes, along with his entire court of arrogant nobles and guards, gazed upon the horrifying face of Medusa, the jeering laughter and cruel expressions instantly froze. A chilling silence fell, broken only by the faint hiss of snakes from the severed head. Stone began to crawl up their bodies, turning flesh to cold, lifeless rock. Their eyes, wide with sudden, dawning horror, became glassy and still. In a matter of seconds, the grand hall of the palace became a silent, chilling gallery of statues, monuments to the king's foolishness and Medusa's terrible power. Polydectes, along with those who supported his tyranny, was utterly destroyed, their bodies frozen in their last moments of arrogance and greed. With Polydectes and his corrupt court turned to stone, Seriphos was free. Perseus released his mother, Danae, from her refuge and reunited with his foster father, Dictys. The people of Seriphos, grateful for their liberation from a cruel king, hailed Perseus as their savior, celebrating his courage and the justice he had brought. Perseus, however, had no desire to rule. Instead, he made Dictys the new, rightful king of Seriphos, a just and compassionate ruler who would bring peace back to the island. His duty to his mother and his adopted home fulfilled, Perseus turned his attention to his next destiny. He could not forget the prophecy that still hung over his head, that he was fated to kill his grandfather, King Acrisius. Despite having a weapon that could easily achieve this, Perseus did not wish to fulfill the grim prophecy through violence or intent. He loved his mother and had no desire to cause her further pain by harming her father. He sought to avoid the fate foretold. He began a journey to Argos, hoping to find his grandfather and perhaps reconcile with him, or at least avoid the fated encounter. But fate, as always, has a way of finding its own path, even when mortals try to outrun it. During an athletic contest in Larissa, a grand event where heroes gathered to compete, Perseus was throwing a discus when, by a cruel twist of misfortune, his discus flew off course. It sailed unexpectedly into the crowd, striking an old man, killing him instantly. That old man was none other than King Acrisius, who had traveled to Larissa to attend the very games. Thus, the prophecy was fulfilled, not by design or malice, but by an unavoidable, tragic accident. The weight of destiny, heavy and unyielding, had found its way, regardless of Perseus's best intentions. Perseus, heartbroken by the accidental death of his grandfather and now burdened by this unintended act, felt that he could not justly rule Argos, having caused the death of its king. To avoid any further conflict or ill-fated consequences, he traded kingdoms with his cousin Megapenthes, becoming the ruler of Tiryns, while Megapenthes took control of Argos. Perseus went on to found the city of Mycenae, a powerful and famous city in ancient Greece that would become a beacon of its own, and had a long and prosperous reign with Andromeda by his side, building a legacy as a great hero whose deeds were sung for generations. Throughout all these adventures, Perseus carefully carried Medusa's head. Its power, though horrifying, had been instrumental in his successes. Eventually, in a final act of respect or perhaps a symbolic completion of his quest, he returned the Gorgon's head to its original bestower, Athena. The goddess, ever strategic and never one to waste a powerful tool, placed Medusa's terrifying head upon her own shield, the Aegis, or sometimes upon her breastplate. There, Medusa's fearsome image continued to serve as a powerful symbol of protection for Athena and a weapon against her enemies, forever reminding all who saw it of divine power and the consequences of looking upon forbidden horror. In a grim twist, the face of the defiled priestess became a tool for the goddess who had cursed her, a permanent emblem of a victory built on profound tragedy. Medusa's physical body may have been destroyed, and her ancient story seemingly concluded with her head adorning a goddess's shield. Yet, her legend did not end there. In fact, her image has echoed through millennia, changing and deepening in meaning, becoming far more than just a terrifying monster. Her story is a testament to the enduring power of myth to adapt and reflect the changing concerns of humanity. Throughout history, many interesting variations and understandings of her tale have been told, each adding a new layer to her complex figure. Here are some of the most compelling ways her story is interpreted, revealing why she remains such a potent and relevant symbol even today. 1. Medusa as a symbol of victimhood and profound injustice. The core of Medusa's tragedy, and one of the most resonant interpretations in modern times, lies in her profound victimhood. She was not born a monster, but made one by divine wrath. Her transformation was a direct consequence of an unspeakable act of violence committed against her by Poseidon within the sacred sanctuary of Athena. This is not merely a side detail of her myth. It is the very catalyst that defines her monstrous existence and fuels the tragic nature of her legend. This particular version, popularized by the Roman poet Ovid in his Metamorphoses, contrasts with earlier Greek traditions where the Gorgons were simply primeval monsters, born of the sea deities Phorcys and Ceto, without the layer of human innocence and divine injustice. Ovid's narrative humanized Medusa, making her suffering central, and it is this version that has largely shaped her modern understanding. Imagine the young Medusa, innocent and utterly devoted, finding solace and purpose in the temple of Athena. Her life was one of serene ritual, contemplative prayer, and a deep, pure connection to her goddess. Every morning, the scent of incense and polished marble would greet her as she began her sacred duties. Her hands, soft and unblemished, would carefully tend to the sacred flame, a symbol of Athena's ever-watchful wisdom. She believed herself safe, protected by her vows of chastity and the sanctity of the hallowed ground she served. She envisioned a life of serene spiritual growth, far removed from the petty jealousies and brutal passions of the mortal world, let alone the gods. Then, suddenly, this sanctuary was violated, her purity shattered by the overwhelming force of a powerful god's unchecked desire. The assault was not just physical. It was a devastating attack on her spirit, her faith, and her very sense of self. The violation left her traumatized, a wound that would never heal, forever poisoning the well of her memories and hopes. She was stripped of her agency, her choices, and her future in a single, brutal moment, the screams swallowed by the echoing stone. But the injustice did not end there. The cruelest twist came with Athena's judgment. Instead of offering solace, protection, or retribution against the true aggressor, Athena punished Medusa, the victim, This divine reaction is often interpreted as a chilling reflection of real-world victim blaming, where the survivor of a horrific act is held accountable for the transgression committed against them, while the perpetrator often escapes consequence. Athena's reasoning, whether driven by outraged pride that her sacred space was defiled, professional rivalry with Poseidon, who had famously competed with her for patronage of Athens, or a cold enforcement of her strict purity laws, fundamentally ignored Medusa's suffering. The goddess's choice to curse Medusa's most beautiful feature, her hair, into venomous snakes, and to render her gaze deadly, was a symbolic annihilation of her former self, a permanent mark of her perceived taint. She was literally dehumanized, exiled from society, and forced to bear the burden of a crime that was not hers. Her once radiant eyes, now instruments of death, became a perpetual reminder of the moment her life was irrevocably shattered. This profound injustice resonates deeply in modern discussions about sexual violence, accountability, and the systemic failures to protect victims. Medusa has become a powerful icon for survivors of sexual abuse, a defiant symbol that acknowledges their pain and the scars of trauma. Many women find strength and solidarity in her image, reclaiming it from its traditional portrayal as a monster of pure evil. When a survivor tattoos Medusa's face on their skin, it is not an embrace of monstrosity, but a powerful statement of resilience, a recognition of their own transformed self, and a reclamation of power over their narrative. Her stony gaze, in this context, becomes a symbolic shield, an ability to freeze or neutralize the aggressor, turning their harmful actions into inert, powerless monuments to their own wrongdoing. It's a way of saying, "You can no longer harm me. My pain has become my armor." This interpretation shifts Medusa from a figure of fear to one of profound empathy and a rallying cry for justice. The sorrow and rage she must have felt, living as a cursed outcast, reflecting daily on the unfairness of her fate, mirrors the deep emotional wounds carried by those who have been wronged and then silenced, shamed, or even punished by society for their victimhood. Her tale serves as a powerful reminder that the true monster is often not the one with the horrifying appearance, but the one who inflicts pain and injustice. 2. Medusa as a symbol of female rage and empowerment. While victimhood highlights Medusa's suffering, another equally powerful and increasingly relevant modern interpretation centers on her transformation into a symbol of fierce, righteous female rage and formidable empowerment. If her initial transformation was a devastating punishment, it also inadvertently granted her immense, unchallengeable power. She became untouchable, unlookable upon, a force that demanded fear and isolation. This narrative reframes her curse not just as a tragedy, but as a violent awakening, a forced evolution into a creature capable of immense, destructive self-preservation. Consider the immense rage she must have harbored, boiling beneath her scaly skin and behind her petrifying eyes. Rage at Poseidon for his brutal, predatory act, a violation that desecrated her body and her spiritual home. Rage at Athena for her cruel and unjust punishment, for turning her into a monster rather than protecting or avenging her. Rage at the entire Olympian pantheon for their arbitrary power and indifference to mortal suffering, and perhaps even a bitter rage at herself, for her innocence that made her vulnerable, for her beauty that attracted such destructive attention. This was not a petty anger, but a primal, elemental fury, a molten core of resentment born from profound betrayal, irreversible loss, and a life stolen. In this interpretation, Medusa's monstrousness is not just a curse, but a radical form of self-defense, a defiant transformation into a being capable of protecting herself when no god or mortal would. Her terrifying nature becomes an impenetrable shield, ensuring that no one can ever again approach her with ill intent without facing immediate, devastating consequences. Her petrifying gaze, therefore, is not merely a curse. It is the ultimate boundary, a weapon forged from her pain that protects her from further harm. It is the silent yet thunderous, scream of a victim finally empowered to silence her tormentors, to turn their aggression back upon them, to demand that those who look at her with malice cease to move. Her snake hair, once a symbol of her curse and reviled appearance, is powerfully reimagined as a crown of fierce, untamed, primal strength. Each serpent, coiling and hissing, represents an aspect of her awakened fury, a visible manifestation of her potent, dangerous power. This is a power born not of gentle beauty, but of a deep, ancient anger, a primordial force that cannot be controlled or silenced by conventional means. Medusa, in this light, embodies the unleashed fury of a woman who has been pushed beyond endurance, who has been stripped of everything, and who has channeled her profound, searing pain into an unyielding force that demands respect and instills fear in those who would dare to harm her. She is a reminder that even the most beautiful and innocent can be driven to monstrousness by overwhelming injustice, and that there is a potent, albeit dark and dangerous, strength in the anger born from such experiences. This interpretation empowers individuals, especially women, to acknowledge and channel their righteous anger against systems and individuals that oppress them, recognizing that anger, when wielded thoughtfully and strategically, can be a catalyst for change, a necessary protection, and a powerful assertion of self. It is a symbol of defiant survival, of turning scars into superpowers, and refusing to be silenced or minimized. 3. The power of the gaze, perception, objectification, and control. Medusa's eyes are undeniably central to her myth, but their symbolism extends far beyond mere petrification. They represent the immense, often dangerous, power of seeing and being seen, of perception and objectification, and ultimately, of control. This theme of the gaze is deeply woven throughout her narrative, from her initial beauty to her monstrous transformation. Before her curse, Medusa's beautiful eyes and radiant appearance were objects of admiration, perhaps even envy. She was seen, desired, and ultimately targeted because of what she represented to others: beauty, purity, and perhaps a subtle challenge to divine authority, as her beauty was said to rival Athena's. Her initial gaze, that of her human beauty, drew Poseidon's destructive attention, leading to her violation. In this sense, she was rendered an object of desire, her physical form dominating her personhood, and this objectification led directly to her suffering. The act of looking at her, in this context, was a precursor to invasion and harm. After her curse, her eyes become the terrifying inverse, instruments of absolute destruction. Her gaze is no longer admired. It is feared, reviled, and avoided at all costs. Anyone who dares to look upon her is instantly turned to stone, rendered immobile, powerless, and utterly lifeless. This transformative power highlights the devastating impact of how one is viewed and judged. For Medusa, her eyes became a perpetual prison, isolating her from all human connection. She could never truly look at her own reflection without seeing the monstrousness that defined her, reinforcing the trauma. She could never look at her sisters without seeing their fear, or at a living creature without condemning it to stone. This curse made her a perpetual outcast, a living weapon whose very existence was a threat to all life. The burden of this power, the constant need to avert her gaze, the self-imposed blindness she endured to protect others, was a constant, agonizing torment, a living embodiment of her enforced separation from the world. Her world became a blurry, peripheral existence, seen only through reflections or glimpses, a stark contrast to the vivid, engaged world she once experienced as a priestess. In a broader sense, Medusa's gaze powerfully symbolizes the dangers of objectification and, particularly in feminist readings, the oppressive male gaze in patriarchal societies. She was objectified by Poseidon, her body seen as something to take without consent. Then by Athena, her beauty was seen as the cause of the problem, deflecting blame from the aggressor. Her new, petrifying gaze, therefore, can be interpreted as a radical reversal of this power dynamic. It is a gaze that turns the objectifier into an object, literally petrifying the one who would dare to look upon her with ill intent, a judging eye, or a desire for control. It's a symbolic statement that those who reduce others to mere objects, or who inflict harm through their gaze, whether literally through violence or symbolically through judgment, dehumanization, or malice, will themselves be rendered inert, frozen in their wrongdoing. This symbolism deeply explores the complex dynamics of power in looking and being looked at, and how a gaze can strip away autonomy or, conversely, become a tool of powerful, defensive agency and retribution. It compels us to consider whose gaze holds power, whose is dangerous, and what happens when the object of a destructive gaze turns that power back upon its source. 4. Transformation, identity, and the blurring of boundaries. Medusa's story is fundamentally one of radical, irreversible transformation, not just physically, but of identity itself. She undergoes a complete metamorphosis from a human priestess into a monstrous Gorgon. This dramatic change forces us to consider profound questions about what truly defines a person, how external events can shatter and reshape identity, and the blurring lines between humanity and monstrosity. It's a narrative that delves into the very essence of selfhood and how it can be violently redefined by trauma. Before the curse, Medusa's identity was clear and cherished, a beautiful, pure, and dedicated servant of Athena, a maiden honored for her devotion. Her appearance, her role in the temple, her spiritual purpose, all were intertwined, forming a cohesive sense of self. The violation and curse violently ripped this identity apart, tearing through the very fabric of her being. Her physical form became alien and terrifying, a constant reminder of the assault, but so did her internal world. The purity she once embodied was replaced by profound rage and unbearable sorrow. Her unwavering devotion to a goddess turned into a bitter resentment towards her celestial patron. She was no longer Medusa, the priestess, the revered maiden of Athens. She was Medusa, the Gorgon, a name that became synonymous with horror, stripping away any recognition of her past self and any connection to the human world. This raises the haunting question: when external circumstances fundamentally alter who you are, when trauma reshapes your very form and existence, how much of your original self truly remains? Does the monster devour the maiden, or is the maiden forever trapped, suffering, within a monstrous form, a prisoner of a curse that defines her against her will? This aspect of her myth explores the deep psychological impact of profound trauma. Just as the physical transformation was agonizing, the internal change was equally devastating. She was forced to live with a new, terrifying power she never wanted, a power that condemned her to eternal isolation. Her former self was gone, replaced by a being feared and hunted. Yet beneath the scales and the incessant writhing of snakes, a flicker of that original Medusa must have remained, the memory of warmth, of sunlight, of quiet devotion, of human connection. This tension between her former human self and her monstrous new identity makes her a deeply tragic figure, forcing us to confront our own definitions of what it means to be human, and how easily those definitions can be shattered by forces beyond one's control. Her monstrousness, therefore, is not inherent evil, but a tragic manifestation of immense pain and unjust suffering. Furthermore, Medusa's transformation powerfully blurs the boundary between human and monster. She was not born a monster, unlike her immortal Gorgon sisters, Stheno and Euryale, who were offspring of ancient, monstrous deities. Medusa became one, a victim of circumstance and divine caprice. This fundamentally challenges the simplistic notion that monsters are inherently evil or born evil. Instead, it strongly suggests that sometimes monsters are created by the very systems or actions meant to maintain order or justice. Her story compels us to ask, is the monster the one who wears the terrifying form, or the one whose actions create such a form? Is it the victim of the curse, burdened with its consequences, or the one who inflicts it, wielding power without compassion? This complex understanding invites profound empathy for the monster and a critical examination of the forces that produce fear, alienation, and violence. Medusa becomes a powerful symbol of the monstrousness that can arise from deep, unaddressed injustice, and a poignant reminder that appearances can deceive, concealing immense suffering beneath a terrifying exterior. Her legend forces us to look closer, to question who is truly monstrous, and to find the humanity even in the most grotesque of forms.